Good morning, Patrick.
Morning, Tim.
Thank you very much for joining us for this chat about ETOA and climate action. And we're having this conversation in December 2020. And one of my observations would be that European tourism is dominated by small businesses, and many of them are obviously still under acute financial stress. So I think the obvious question to start with is why should they prioritize action on climate and what practical options are open to them?
So, look, I think most business owners, Tim, are of the mindset that they know this is coming down the track and that they know they need to do something, but they need practical help, where to start. 75% of consumers, and multiple surveys have shown this, 75% of consumers will bring in sustainability criteria into their buying decisions. So shortly, it's going to become a business imperative. But again, where to start? There's a lot of noise around it. There's potential for greenwashing, and there's a shortage of practical help to get people onto the ladder. And that's why, from our perspective, we set up TerraVerde as a practical means of helping people get onto that ladder. Look, owners, in my view, want to do the right thing, but we all know, and to your point, they're suffering from the financial fallout of the pandemic. So really, how do you make the right choices without those breaking the bank? And I think that's really twofold. One is taking steps that will impact on the business, and two, making it self-funding. And that self-funding both is in terms of reducing consumption in terms of water, waste, electricity, and those things that can actually save money, and also in making it into a marketing opportunity where businesses can actually benefit and go out to market with a stamp of authenticity. And really at TerraVerde, that's what we're here to help businesses do.
That's very interesting. So we talked about smaller businesses, and I guess for larger businesses, it's perhaps easier for them to develop their green agenda because economies of scale can fund in-house expertise. I think the point you're making suggests that there's tools out there for the fragmented, smaller supply chain, which is still dominated by smaller businesses.
Totally agree. And I think for smaller businesses, one, they can be more agile. This should not be something to adopt that, as I say, breaks the bank. So they can do it in a cost-effective manner, which can really actually level up the playing field with some of the bigger companies. We know the markets that are beginning to adopt this, Tim. Germany and Scandinavia, already customers are insisting on sustainable criteria. I think with the Biden presidency in America, that's going to become much more of an important factor in the US market. And then even in Asia, we're getting a lot of feedback that, for example, from Japan, customers also from that market are insisting on it. So these are all areas that small businesses can enter, and we know that they're hungry and they're agile, and this gives them a chance to move into those markets. Look, I think just on the point of what practical measures you're going to take, it starts with measuring. No one will walk into a board meeting or into a meeting with their bank manager without a P&L or a set of sales figures or a balance sheet. It's the same thing here. You need to have science-based targets where you've got out and measured your own footprint, and that starts with the measuring of your own activities, what they call scope 1 and scope 2. But then moves on to the supply chain, very importantly. And really, once you've done that, you benchmark it, you identify 3 to 4 quick wins, which should be achievable and shouldn't cost the earth. So really, in a practical level, that's the way I would advise to go forward.
Got it. And thinking about it from a policy perspective, and ETOA spends a lot of its time talking with its partners at institutional level in Brussels and with other industry associations. The good news is that next generation EU funding is going to find about 750 billion euros for recovery and resilience.
Agreed today. I believe, finally.
Well, let's see. But what is for sure is that the key strategic policy objectives are to support a transition to a more sustainable and digitalized economy. So, given tourism's value as a job generator, where would you encourage countries to invest for long-term benefit to the visitor economy and its host communities?
I think they need to invest holistically, and I think really you've given many of the answers in your question, Tim. We know that tourism is the fastest generator of jobs. We know that tourism is one of the fastest growing sectors economically, so is increasing the tax take and the general health of the economy. But also we know that tourism stands accused of benefiting from public spaces. So, how do you reconcile those things? I don't believe it. Actually, I think tourism has great benefits, but we haven't always been very good at communicating those benefits in a practical way that shows something to communities. I always use the example of Amsterdam and how tourists fund 50% of the public transport system. If we can articulate those things in the right way, but it's not just a communications, it's building back better in a holistic way where sustainability and tourism's benefit can be built in, but also, I'm a great believer in education. I think tourism hasn't spent enough time educating its workforce beyond a kind of induction thing where you get actually we should be building towards professional competence, and I think those kind of measures will engage local communities and help. And I think ETOA, I take up my hat off to ETOA and also to you personally, Tim, in being a great force for a benign force for developing that, breaking down silos. And I think ETOA can be a major force in that rebuild process.
That's very kind. Thanks, Patrick. But I wonder, given your experience, you've got extensive experience in B2B and B2C businesses during a period in which the tourism industry's scale and the means of distribution were completely transformed by technology. Demand has also grown as foreign travel has become within reach of a much greater population. We're talking about managing down our carbon footprint, and the drivers are for more demand. So what changes do you foresee in long-haul tourism to Europe by 2030?
I think the driver for this will be customer behavior. I think there will be a fundamental change in the way that customers behave, Tim. 50 years ago, when I was a small boy, drink driving was pretty widespread and was smoking. Now, 50 years down the line, both of those things to a greater or lesser degree are less socially acceptable. Now, I think the same will be true of one's carbon footprint, and there will be a huge onus on people in the next 10 years, first to be aware and then take responsibility for the impact that they're making on the world around them. Now, I don't think that will be totally benign because, when consumers, as we know, go into a local community when they're visiting a city or a locality, I think the local communities will demand that of them. So that will change the way that consumers want to consume travel. And I think that will have a huge impact on low carbon buildings like hotels, electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell coaches, locally sourced food. All of those things will become a prerequisite for the way that the tourism is designed. And I think, simultaneously, that's going to blow away a lot of old, outdated practices. I mean, honestly, in 2020, going to an airport and queuing for the car rental, queuing at the reception of a hotel, the idea of luxury in a 5-star hotel that you order a coffee and it takes 20 minutes for the waiter to bring it to your room, and it's probably overstewed and cold by that time. You know, when you could have a coffee machine in your room that you could get it instantly. You know, these kind of things are massively going to change and blow away a lot of old practices. And, you know, out with the old, in with the new, that sustainability will come in as one element to replace that. And as you alluded to, I think technology will be the facilitator for a lot of these changes.
I'm sure that's right. And the travel industry has been one of the earlier adopters for a lot of technology. It is an innovator as a sector. But it's still probably fair to say that for many, climate issues have slipped down the agenda this year. Short-term survival until demand returns and travel restrictions ease is the priority. But in 2020, we have seen science-based policy take center stage, you know, as the world seeks to control COVID-19 and find ways to adapt to the constraints that has imposed on us. So thinking about decision-making in businesses, do you sense a growing acceptance that the climate agenda must be incorporated into business planning?
Absolutely. And I think that is why ETOA has thrown its weight behind the Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency initiative, and I'm wholly supportive of that. I think ETOA can play a huge role. Look, let me give you an example of how this will impact on business planning. BlackRock, who are the single largest investor in the world, will no longer invest in a company that hasn't done a green audit. Similarly, for 53% of American publicly listed companies. Now, you know, think of how that will have a practical repercussion when that next meeting or incentive comes from a branch office of one of those American publicly listed companies. They will be demanding that the hotel that's used or the tour operator that's using it or the DMC has some kind of green audit or green credentials as part of that RFP, that request for pricing. Now, you know, I'd put it to those owners out there and those managers, you know, are you ready for that kind of change that's going to come down the track that will influence and you will need to build into your business planning? So, you know, I think that ETOA will play and can play a massively beneficial force in that transition. And I hope from a practical level, TerraVerde can help as well.
That's great. And we're looking forward to collaborating further, Patrick. So I think that's very clear about the challenges and the opportunities for the smaller businesses. But how do you see larger businesses playing a role in the transition?
Oh, well, two very clear points there, Tim. You know, one is larger businesses will have more overheads, and more overheads means a greater opportunity to save. You know, many larger businesses will have 5, 10 offices around the world. All of the stats show that you can, with some judicious spending, or some judicious changes, let's say, you can make a 20% saving in your overhead consumption on your energy costs. So that will benefit larger businesses. And the UNWTO also says that there will be, you can get, with a bit of expenditure, you can make a 6-month return on investment. Well, you know, who's heard of a return on investment only taking 6 months? Oh. So that's one aspect. But the second aspect, I think, is the role of big businesses or the larger businesses to be influencers. I was at GTA throughout the 90s and the noughties, and we saw, for example, in the 90s, when we started asking for 3-year-old coaches maximum as part of our buying decisions, that changed the coaching industry within Europe. And many other players, some ahead of us, some behind of us, followed, and that really changed the environment. A similar idea was in the noughties with the whole safety. Suddenly, safety audits on hotels, on all sorts of transport, etc., etc. And again, this became, you know, what could be quite an onerous administrative task but was demanded, but was driven by the larger companies. So we're already seeing the Travel Corporation with their 11-point plan, hotel beds with their green hotels programs. These are major companies that are adopting criteria, and this is going to act as a catalyst for change throughout the whole industry. And you know, at TerraVerde, we've got 100 years plus of experience in dealing with these supply chains, so we're pretty well equipped to help if you know, if called upon.
Good to know, Patrick. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks, Tim.